Hello, BookTube, and welcome to my library tour for 2022, where I originally planned to be going through all of the books on my shelves and giving myself a visual record of what I have in 2022. That's the value that I've always had from the previous library tours that I've done. But I confess, this library tour has faltered. It has reached a crisis point. My library of books on shelves, printed books on shelves, is, I must just ultimately admit, in a serious state of flux, serious and prolonged. So the more I think about it, and the more these things move around, and some of them move out of Hyde Cottage, the more I think, what's the point? This is the very worst year for you to be making a visual record of the books that you have, since it's all in flux. I don't know quite what to do about that. I sort of thought that this week I would move back to pulling physical books off shelves and talking about them, but the shelves are in disarray, just in almost every room. So I don't know. I still like talking about every book under the sun with you. I would still like to do show you all the books that I've read and talk about them a little. And that is possible with the Library of the Lost, this little sub-feature of my library book tour where I show you the covers of books that I've had in the past and mention them just a little. A lot of you have mentioned to me that these books weren't known to you, or that maybe some of them were, but you were naturally curious to know what I thought of them. So I know that some of you are, as the Dude Bros say, extracting value from the Library of the Lost. I'm not sure how far to continue even that. So I'm going to let the whole of this process limp along in the month of April. I tend to make categorical decisions at break points. So not just in the middle of a month, but at maybe the end of the month or the end of a year or the end of a season. We shall see. In the meantime, I have plenty of books that I can show you, just in case they're of interest to you. This first one is George Goodwin's Benjamin Franklin in London. And it was a really good, little bit surface level, a little bit too surface level for me. That probably wouldn't be true for a lot of general interest readers. I've been spelunking down deep in the primary records for Benjamin Franklin. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that this was companionably written, but there wasn't anything in it I didn't already know. And that might not be true for a lot of general interest readers who maybe don't remember how much time Franklin spent in London and how active he was there. So I can certainly recommend it. I'm sure that it exists as a paperback. Again, on a lot of these things, I'm not sure if I'm blurbed on the paperback. I reviewed a lot of these things for a number of different venues, including Open Letters itself, my own venue. But publishers don't often send me paperbacks. So usually I will find a blurb of mine when I encounter a paperback in a bookstore. And I don't think I've ever seen this in paperback. Okay, well, no danger of being blurbed on this next one. This is by Deanne Mills, and this is a romance novel called Deadlock, which I think I downloaded eons ago when it came out, and it was very, very lazy. If I remember it correctly, it was very, very lazy. He's a maverick who doesn't play by the rules. She's stuck up and ambitious and does play by the rule book. They've got a pressing case. They need to learn the best qualities of each other. They fall in love in the process. Nothing that you haven't seen a million times. Yeah, okay. All right. I don't know where or when I reviewed a lot of these things. This is by Soo-Young Park, and this is Great Soul of Siberia. And this is a quest novel. Not a novel, a quest account. It's a travelogue, but it's also meant to be a kind of natural history of the biggest cats on the planet, the Siberian tiger. They're big, they're rare, they're endangered. They have an evolutionary history all of their own, all kinds of habits that are only sketchily known. I read this and really, really enjoyed it. Of course, the natural comparison to make is with The Snow Leopard by Peter Mathiasson, where the quest to see these things becomes kind of its own point. Although this book has full-color insets, really neat photos about... This is not a quest without a goal, right? Like, for instance, Peter Mathiasson also did a famous book called Blue Meridian, where he's looking for great white sharks and finding precious few of them, so that you start to wonder, well, what's the point of the book then? Until you realize it's spending time with the author. That's the point of the book. There's no sleight of hand like that here. Siberian tigers are present in this book. And it was fascinating to me. I have never actually seen a Siberian tiger in the wild. I don't think I ever even came across traces of them. I just think there are so few of them, and they want so little to do with anything aside from their prey animals and each other that I don't think I ever got the chance. This next one is Christine Corton. This is a terrific, terrific book. It may be recent enough so that maybe it showed up on this channel in the very earliest days of the channel, maybe as a paperback. Baby, what are you licking? What are you doing? Huh? What are you doing? You're just licking yourself over and over again. This is London Fog, a biography of London Fog. Not just the great fog of the 20th century, but also just the phenomenon of London fog that's recorded, going back centuries. What it is about London, what it is about its, geophysical location or its industries or its wind patterns that causes London fogs to happen and gives them their particular characteristics. Almost like walking through soup, hence the pea soup moniker. The London fog is omnipresent in, for instance, Sherlock Holmes stories. And you never get the sense when Watson is describing the weather outside, you never get the sense that it's just the kind of fog that might roll in on a cool New England evening. It always feels more oily than that, more present than that. This was terrific. Absolutely terrific. This book was, I read it and thought, I usually have very little patience with micro-histories, with potted histories like this, but in this case, this is an example of how superbly it can be done. And I was overjoyed when the random tumblers, in this case it was not me, the random tumblers in the American book world suddenly gave this thing the review reception of a lifetime. It was reviewed everywhere, by everybody. That's always nice to see. I reviewed it myself, but again, I have no idea if I'm on the paperback. I would have had a lot of competition if I were. Frida, cut it out, baby. Stop that. Is something bothering you? Sometimes she gets into this zen where she's just mindlessly licking. And I wouldn't care, except that I have to deal with the hairballs. But it does seem like something on her right leg is bothering her. We shall see. We shall see. So this next book is by Uni Turretini. It's great, but it's also intensely disturbing. This is a tragedy in Norway's history. This is The Mystery of the Lone Wolf Killer. Anders Breivik. And there is the island in question. Any of you who don't know this story, there's this book, and there's also a book called One of Us, two relatively contemporary books giving a whole history and analysis of this monstrous event, the monstrous thing that Anders Breivik did. It's painful reading. What I don't want to rehearse it on this channel, but it's painful reading what he did. And it's all recent history. Most of you will be old enough to remember when this was in the news. I am, and I read these two accounts. This and the book called One of Us are both brilliant. Neither one is less than the other. They're just incredibly hard reading. That's all. It makes for incredibly hard reading. When you read this story, there come many, many points in the minute-by-minute recounting of the killing, the mass shooting. There are many, many points where you desperately want to be able to just reach into the narrative and stop it from happening. It's just so clearly documented and so incredibly depraved. So it's a strong recommendation for a book, although maybe not a strong recommendation for subject matter. Then we have Jonathan Wildman's book, Rust, The Longest War. Again, this is a potted micro-history. Again, I thought it would work my one good nerve on that basis, but this was terrific. It's all about Rust. It's what Rust is, how it works. There's a natural history, so to speak, of Rust here, but also the long struggle that humanity has had against Rust, regardless of where you are in the world, regardless of who your human opponents are. It really opened my eyes to the omnipresence of this enemy, the omnipresence of this pernicious process that happens all the time and that people constantly have to take precautions against. I thought it was just fascinating, and it'd be easy enough to demonstrate it. Rust is, as Waldman puts it in this book over and over again, Rust is waiting. It's just waiting. This is a wet world and an oxygen-rich world. The Rust is just waiting anywhere. And it doesn't take, thinking about the wreck of the Titanic to illustrate that. All I would need to do to give you a first-hand visual image of rust would be to take this little iPad and throw it in the backyard and leave it just overnight. Just overnight would probably be enough time for rust to start. It would certainly be, if I left it a week, it would be visible on every part of this machine. That's kind of amazing. And this is an amazing book. I wish, this and London Fog, I wish I still had. I would probably reread them. Oh, okay. All right, this is a book of poetry. This was selected later poems by C.K. Williams, who I interviewed a couple of times and liked. A writer of what is nowadays, for good or ill, called the old school. I've never liked his poetry, not much. It strikes me as more intellectually clever exercises than anything that does what I like poetry to do. I've never, in other words, been moved by a C.K. Williams poem. Even the volume that I think followed this one, which was the volume poems that he brought out after he'd received a terminal diagnosis. You'd think, if anything is going to put that kind of fire in the belly of your poetry, it'll be that, and it resolutely did not. So I don't know if there are many C.K. Williams fans out there. I'm not sure there are many people who even remember him. But if you are out there, I'd love to hear from you. I count myself as a fan, even though his poetry didn't do anything to me that it was, I think, supposed to do. Very much a throwback, I think, to the days of the gentleman poet, whose poetry is more demographic exercise than a demonic expression of art, and really shows that way. There are a lot of super talented poets in the middle of the 20th century who mocked that kind of suburban gentleman's poet. But there were also things to be mocked. There were poets like that who just kept right on writing. Okay. All right. This next one, I cut off the author's name. Isn't that the story of a lifetime? This is The Dark Heart of Night. This is a 1930s historical novel set in New York. And there's a furtive, sort of odds stacked against it love affair that works out really well. But the main thing about this book that works well is the evocation of the atmosphere. Just terrific evocation of atmosphere. And this is by Vince McCaffrey. That's the author's name is cut off on the book. I don't know why, but it's extra ironic in this case since I knew this author. And for a long, long time, he ran a really good used bookstore in Boston called Avenue Victor Hugo. That was on Newbury Street, back when shops could still afford to be on Newbury Street. Newbury Street is eye-wateringly expensive for rents now, which means that multinational companies, boutique companies, can open a store on Newbury Street and just eat the rent just for the sake of the one customer who will come in a month and spend $35,000. So you'll walk up Newbury Street and it's pretty, but you'll see shop after shop after shop that hasn't had a customer in weeks. Weeks. Once upon a time, it was a far more thriving place before the rent market exploded in the 1980s. It was a far more happening place. There was a Tower Records. There was a comic shop that is still there. Newbury Comics is still on Newbury Street, and there was also Avenue Victor Hugo. There were also a couple of retail bookstores that are largely gone. Avenue Victor Hugo was a cram-packed used bookstore that I used to spend a great deal of time in. And this was Vince's novel. I'm pretty sure it's not the only novel he's ever written. I think it's the only one that he actually sent me before we lost touch with each other. Okay, this next one is by David Talbot, who wrote a book called Brothers, about the Kennedy brothers, that I read and reviewed. It was one of the first things that I reviewed when I was getting back into reviewing after a long hiatus. And this is called The Devil's Chessboard, which is about Allen Dulles and the CIA, and it digs into a whole bunch of primary records, even primary records about the JFK assassination. A big, meaty book. If I remember correctly, far meatier than his book Brothers, which I thought was a little bit time-serving. This has had a lot more meat on its bones. I would like to encounter this again as a physical book or an ebook. I would like to try this again. Just to sort of shore up my opinion that this is not just a shallow historian. There are plenty. There's a whole graduating class of shallow historians out there. They come out with a book every year, and there's a pro forma amount of primary source research that's done, but it just underscores what else you have to do to write a really good work of history. And some of those elements are just not present in a lot of these new historians. One of those elements is a deep historical perception. How much thinking have you done about your subject in historical context? There's so many history books that are out there. I mean, the mainstream publishing lists are full of them. And I get every one of them hoping maybe this one will jump off the page. And instead, well, this book didn't strike me that way. So maybe it's time for me to reread it. Okay, this next one is by Melinda Snodgrass. This is The Edge of Dawn, a fantasy novel. If I remember correctly, this is a novel about Earth being beset by Lovecraftian giant tentacled beings. And there's one guy who has the gift to wield a particular weapon that can hurt them, the only thing that can work against them. And he falls into, I think, if I remember correctly, an uneasy, odd relationship with another person that he senses might have that ability, another human. So two people to fight against the monsters besieging the world. I remember this as not really paying off on its potential, so I think that's the reason why I don't have it. I think that's the reason probably why I'm not remembering it very well, is that I think a lot of it struck me as pretty pro forma. Okay, then this next one is a Cassell military paperback. Well, we've seen these before. Cassell for a while did, I don't know if they still do, I don't know if they're still in business, but for a while they did reprints of classic military history titles. And this was a really, really good one. This is Corelli Barnett's book, The Swordbearers, which bucked with the trend of World War I military histories when it originally appeared, by not talking so much about the poets in the trenches and the mud and the no man's land and the barbed wire, but rather talking about the people who were pulling the strings, the people who were making the decisions on either side and on all sides, and what governed their thinking, and were they really the callous monsters that later history paints them to be. A little bit of a spoiler, they were, but it's still an eloquent book. Oh wow, all right, well, we'll finish up with something that very much is not pro forma. This is by B. Catling, and it is a great fantasy novel. It is a great fantasy novel. It's relatively contemporary. It's just a few years ago, so it hasn't ascended to that pantheon officially, but you can take it from me. This is The Vor. If I remember correctly, this is the UK cover. If I remember correctly, the US cover was so ugly that it was almost a parody, even of the usual parody of the hideous American cover. This is lovely, and this is a fantasy novel that has a whole bunch of larger-than-life characters, crackpots and maniacs and strivers and dreamers, but the main character here is a gigantic semi-carnivorous forest. That is the long-standing impression that this book will make on you. There were a couple of sequels that I liked, but no, those of you who read books like this will know that nothing quite recaptures the awe, the amazement of encountering these concepts, this world, in the first book for the first time. The sequels can be really good, but they almost never recapture that. This is just horrifying and evocative and brilliant. A strong note to end on. I absolutely loved this book, and yet I do not own a copy of The Vor or either of its sequels, because I know this is going to make me sound very shallow, but because I did not want to own the American hardcover. It was ugly, just totally ugly. So I got rid of it. I got rid of the sequels as we got them. I'm pretty sure a couple of the sequels showed up on this channel in ye olden days. I got rid of them all because they're parodies of ugly American books, so I just didn't bother. I figured somewhere down the line someone will make these are thin enough books so that you could make a big omnibus and maybe commission new art or import the UK artwork, or that sooner or later at the Brattle Bookshop I would find a UK paperback of this with this cover. I guess there's no shame in admitting that counts for me. That counts for something for me. The American editions were hideously boring looking, so I just got rid of them, and I'm just counting on the Brattle providing. It hasn't yet, but it will. It will. So we can end on a real strong note, because this is, nevertheless, covers or no covers. I know a lot of you are bothered less by covers than I am. Covers or no covers, this is a fantasy novel you should read, and because it's so new, you may not have heard of it. Definitely put it on your list. When the canon of great 21st century fantasy is written, this book will be on that canon. I unconditionally guarantee it. And there you go. That's a little more of the Library of the Lost. I'm the one who feels lost now because I don't quite know what to do with this library tour. I think what I will do, at least right now, what I think I will do is continue to just walk you through, more books that I have read, but on the tablet. I talk about them a little, and then when the month is over, decide what I want to do about the actual physical books. I mean, I'm looking at the shelves, and I'm seeing just upheaval everywhere. So what's the point? What would be the point of doing it? It'd be different if I had a settled library, but I don't at the moment. I'll figure it out. I'll mull on it, but I will be back. Thank you, BookTube.